Hey folks, welcome back. My name is Cyrus Davis, and today I have two fantastic guests for our San Antonio Meta Forecast. You guys can just go ahead and introduce yourselves. We'll start with Cal.
My name's Cal Connor. Recently got first at the Toronto Regional Championship and a longtime player.
My name is Christian Labella. I got top 8 of the Toronto Regional Championships, and I'm about to play in San Antonio this upcoming weekend.
Fantastic. Yeah, both had a very strong event at Toronto. And fittingly, you both played Drago, which our first question will be about Drago here. So let's just hop right into it. So this past weekend, focus shifted away from North America to other parts of the globe. And as has seemingly been common in events outside of North America, Reggie Drago VSTAR was still clearly the deck to beat, but was much less dominant than it has been in North American events. Is Reggie Drago VSTAR on a downward trend, maybe just because people are sort of getting bored of it, or do we expect it to be back up to the around 20% day 2 meta share that we saw at Toronto Regionals? We'll start with Cal.
I think it's kind of weird because always like in the EU and then like some of the other like regions, like I think there was one going on Latin America, Rio. They don't play Drago as much compared to like here in the States. And other than like Brent I think ended up getting top four in Birmingham with it. But I think that like they just don't play Drago as much, and the high level players don't play it as much as well compared to like in the US where it's like okay, the good players are all just going to play the BDIF and just be like, all right, we're all playing the BDIF and we're all just going to play mirror matches.
Yeah, Christian, do you generally agree?
Yeah, I was about to say that EU and Latin America, they don't uh, Drago meta share is definitely not as high as it is in North America. Like top players like Tord, I think Tord brought Tragos and like all the other big names in the EU. Just yeah, I'm just not playing Drago right now. So I think like San Antonio is gonna be like around what it was in Toronto. Maybe not as dominant, but like around the same numbers, I'd say.
Yeah, I feel like in Latin America, we often see like very specific decks. Each format seem to just always be popular. There, like last format, it was like Terrapagos was just and Raging Bolt was all that Latin American players seemed to be wanting to bring. Um, and this format, I mean, we saw Terrapagos win, which I know the player that won with it also came ninth at like the last Latin American event with it. So players just like tending to stick towards the same things. And then in Europe, it seems like people just sort of like always play. I don't know. I feel like players more tend towards whatever they're most comfortable with than the top American players who tend to just lean more heavily towards the best deck in format, especially when we have something close to a tier 0 deck like Drago. All right, well, speaking of the EU event, Charizard EX took another big win in Birmingham Regionals, which makes a second champion title for the deck this format. However, the deck's Reggie Drago V-Star matchup remains highly contentious. How favorable or unfavorable do you feel the Reggie Drago V-Star matchup is for Charizard EX? And if unfavorable, would that be enough to like scare you away from even considering Charizard at all? We'll start with Christian this time.
Um, I think it's favorable. I'd say like 60-40
For
around
Drago.
there for in Drago. Yeah, in Drago's favor. I think like as like my other point, like Charizard dominated because like there's not as many like people playing Drago in EU, so like Drago is like Zard's like pretty much the only like bad matchup on meta, I'd say. I don't know, I have to look at it more, but yeah, it makes sense for Zard to dominate if like people weren't playing Drago as much. I don't think like if anything, Charizard shouldn't scare people off Drago. It should like this win should make want to make more people play Drago, so that could definitely be a factor on like if how high in meta share Drago's gonna be in San Antonio. But yeah, I'd say the matchup's pretty favored. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cal.
I think I would probably agree. I think Charizard is a really strong deck in the current format. I think that it's probably somewhere between like the 65-35 matchup spread with like Drago. Drago is like the clear like deck where it's kind of struggling to. But then when you like look at the top cut brackets of like the EU tournament that it ended up winning. I didn't look too much at the Rio one. I'll look at that a little bit later. But the Birmingham one that it did end up winning, if you look at the other decks, it's like Terrapagos, which traditionally has like a tougher Zard matchup, and then the Palkia Terrapagos deck as well, which I haven't played too much of, but people tell me that it's not that great of a matchup into Charizard as well. Like it tends to struggle against it as well. So like when you see like some of these other decks that did well in the tournament and they all kind of like fumble towards like Charizard matchup, you can kind of see Charizard as being like a very dominant deck. And then it's also like Charizard does specifically very well into the decks that are supposed to like counter Reggie Drago, like the Raging Bolts of the world, the Miraidons of the world, and stuff like that. So like whenever like Reggie Drago does very well, like some of these counters sometimes see a little bit uptick in play, and then Charizard kind of dominates those decks.
Yeah, I agree that Drago is definitely slightly significantly favored in Zard, probably 60-40 ish. I would say, and I think that Charizard just like consistently does what it wants to do, and gives players a lot of options. So it seems like the players that are really good at playing Charizard will keep doing well with it. And then in Europe, like you guys emphasized, there's not as much Drago to sort of keep Zard from making it to top 8. But then you look at the top 8 at Toronto with 6 Drago, and it's like, well, there were lots of great Zard players who did make deep runs at Toronto, but once they got to like those final winning in tables, they weren't getting through those last few Drago players. Palkia VSTAR with Terrapagos EX made up 3 of the top 8 spots in Birmingham and won the Rio de Janeiro regionals. This game was a massive surprise to me, as the deck, I think it had a top 4 at the last EU regional as well, but otherwise I haven't really seen it since Surging Sparks released. And I'm just don't think the deck. I've never thought the deck was that great. Was this a surprise to you guys? And do you think that the deck is still on the radar going into San Antonio? We'll start with Cal this time.
Yeah, it was kind of surprising to me. I seen it around, but I kind of thought that the deck wasn't real. I didn't think it was as good as like its results this weekend just like showed. I like if you asked me last week if I thought that like the deck would have performed this level, I would have said no way. I didn't think that the deck was really great. Maybe it's because my lack of testing with the deck, and I didn't really like give it a chance. But it's definitely like on my like radar now to where like decks where I'm like this week or even like in the next few days, I'm like, well, I think I need to get some reps in against this deck because I didn't really think this deck was real, so I didn't really care to get like games against it. So now that like I see that it's like doing so well, people might actually bring it to the next event. I'm like, okay, let me get some reps into this deck and make sure that like I actually know like what I'm doing if I hit into this deck because I think it might be like a deck that some people are like, oh, this deck did well, seems kind of cool, and maybe I'll give it a try.
Yeah, Christian, did you expect? I know you're on DDG. I know Caleb played. I don't know if other DDG members played this deck at UIC. Do you think this deck has legs?
I don't. I don't think this deck was that good. I think it was like decent in where I played like LEIC because like the surprise factor, no one really knew what it was. It's like kind of came from like left field. I guess it kind of is the case in this scenario too. No one's really respecting the deck, so maybe they didn't know how to play against it. It kind of did surprise me that like 3 of them made top 8 in EU. Because like EU, a lot of people like to play Zard in EU, and the Zard matchup is not that good for that deck, I don't think. So it is a little surprising. I still don't think the deck's that good. Um, Although I haven't tested it at all, so I could just be wrong. I don't know how good the Drago matchup is or anything, but yeah, I was shocked. I don't think the deck's that good.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I tried the deck quite a bit when it first came out. I haven't tried it in the Surging Sparks format yet, so like you guys, I can't really attest too much personally to how good like the specific list that was doing well is. But I haven't felt like the deck was that strong. I mean, I don't think it has that favorable matchups into like Drago or Zard. Probably unfavorable matchups into both, which like does not seem ideal.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, definitely. I mean, clearly is better than a lot of players, including us, expected. Um, Archaludon EX, another deck that has received a massive amount of new hype. This one since winning the Champions League in Osaka, albeit in a different format than the one that we're playing now. The hype did end up converting to it being the second most popular deck in day 2 at Birmingham Regionals. But it did not. It had one spot in top 16, but it did not end up converting to a top 8 finish at either Birmingham or Rio de Janeiro. do you still think that Archaludon EX should be on people's radars going into San Antonio, or is this more of a deck that is not going to be making any waves most likely until Prismatic Evolutions releases? We'll start with Christian this time.
Um, yeah, I don't think this deck's gonna like get top 8 in San Antonio or anything. I think it's definitely a good next format, but this format, I don't think it's that good. Although the list Liam was playing with the Pidgeot Dusknoir, I think I like that one better than like the default one with like it's like straightforward, you boss, boss, boss. I don't know. I'm not again like same with the Palkia. I don't know what this deck's matchup spreads like. I don't like know a lot about it, but just I just don't see this deck being like a top like pick, like a top deck for anyone. I don't see this getting top cut in San Antonio, or let alone like top 16. I could be proven wrong, but yeah, I think it was definitely just a deck that um is just gonna be dominant next format, but not this format.
Yeah. I think I would probably agree with that. I think Archaludon is solid. Like it's an okay deck. Like I think it's somewhere between like the 8th to like 10th best deck in the format, and it's like somewhere around like that range. But it's like it's not like an insanely amazing deck. When I like tested it, it felt like it just like a deck where it's like I'm gonna do what I do. I'm gonna boss, 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 and if I get boss, 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 I'm gonna win, and if I don't, I'm gonna lose.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think I also agree that like the list that Liam and I think Henry Chow played as well to Birmingham with the Pidgeot and Dusk Noir Scramble Switch. That list definitely seemed like it had like more merit. At least gave you more room to like do more things and have more skill expression involved. But I don't think that the deck is. I think the deck wasn't seeing play for a reason. I don't think that it suddenly it wins a big event in Japan and that changes things much. I think that the deck is still more people are playing it, and so it's definitely gonna obviously have a little bit more success. But I don't expect it to make top 8 at San Antonio, and I probably wouldn't recommend it. Okay, so Snorlax is a deck that seems to be consistently fairly well positioned in the metagame. Managed to be the third most played deck at Toronto Regionals, but it hasn't secured a top 8 spot in this format yet. It has declined in popularity pretty significantly this past weekend. Are you still worried about playing against Snorlax or other control decks, or do you feel like they're not popular enough still to be a real threat in a field of over 2,000 players? We'll start with Cal.
So with Snorlax, I think Snorlax is actually in a pretty decent spot in the format, but it's just weird because so many people have just differences in their list to where it's like you can't necessarily account for everything that they have in the first game. And then if they catch you by surprise the first game and maybe steal a game off of you, and then even though the second or the third game you could easily win just by playing around like that one card tech that they have, you've already lost a game in the set and you have no chance to win. So you're either going to tie or you're going to lose, which kind of hinders Snorlax a little bit in this current format because like the Dragos are so different in lists sometimes where it's like, oh, the Dragos sometimes they have Temple. And if they have Temple, if I'm playing around Temple the whole game, I'm going to win. But if I'm not and I'm playing to a different line the entire match, then I could lose. Or if they have like the random clone or some of them cut the clone or some of them like have differences inside the list. And it's like kind of annoying. And then same thing with some of the other lists, like the Tarapago lists that were running around a little bit before, where they had like the Penny and then the Palpat and Turo, and just random. There's just randomness in the list. That there's not like a consensus like base for lists right now because everyone is like kind of playing the same decks, but they're kind of off by like 1, 2 to 3 cards. So if you lose one game with Snorlax, it's kind of like, well, I just completely lost. And then like also like the randomness of the format, where it's like some of those like turbo decks, like the Turbo Roaring Moon kind of running around, where it's like this deck's not really amazing, but it's like around enough in the format, and if you hit it, you just kind of automatically lose. And then same with some of the other like Pecharunt decks. I think I played against a Charizard that last time I played Snorlax, I had a Pecharunt in their deck for some reason, which was not fun for me.
Petra
But
emoji.
yeah. But I think it's the randomness of the format and not being able to account for the list that really is hindering Snorlax right now. But it's really interesting because I think that Snorlax is in a really good spot because like if you look at like the lists that do well, it's like, oh wow, Snorlax should do pretty well against him. Like even at SAC when I was like playing Snorlax, I was like, all these top 8 decks my deck does so good against, but I just couldn't get there.
Yeah. And Christian, do you feel like I know we played at Toronto. I was playing Snorlax. Do you feel like Snorlax is a deck that you or have in mind when you're preparing for San Antonio? Is it like a deck that you're thinking about when you consider your tech choices, or you're just kind of like, I'm playing Drago, like I can beat Snorlax sometimes, it's good enough.
Yeah, I consider it like a little. It's not really like a major factor, but like yeah, I think it's in a really good spot. I think it's definitely a sleeper pick. Really good play. But I don't think a lot of people are gonna be playing Snorlax. Like, not a lot of people play Snorlax. Even though like Toronto, it was like, what'd you say, like third most popular deck?
Yeah, it was like
I don't think.
10% of day two, not day one, but day
Yeah,
two was the most popular.
yeah. I don't think we're gonna see those numbers in San Antonio. Um, but I do think it's a really good play. I'm just for that reason that like I don't think it's popular. I'm like not thinking about it at like that much, but I do like play clone still for like it's for like a bunch of reasons, but Snorlax is a big reason why I do play clone. Um, yeah, I think yeah, Snorlax is definitely a solid play. You have a solid Drago matchup, solid matchup into like most of the field. Yeah, I'd actually recommend that deck if you're going to San Antonio. I think it's a solid play.
Yeah, so yeah, I played Snorlax in Toronto along with a few other people. I know Dennis was lost his win into Pidgeot control, and probably had a decent matchup against anything else in top eight, with the Snorlax list. And I do think it's still a very strong play for San Antonio. Probably a similar list. I think that the deck is very well positioned. I think that it is going to be a little bit less popular in San Antonio than it was in Toronto, though, for sure. One, because I mean there were at least like there were a significant number of players from my group that were playing the deck that we single handedly increased the number in day two, and we won't be there at all. But I think that like Toronto was honestly the deck that I felt like Snorlax was the most poised to do well in, and I think that seeing it not make top eight will discourage a lot of players from bringing it to San Antonio, even though I think it's probably about equally as well positioned. Okay, is there a deck that you refuse to take an unfavorable matchup against going into San Antonio regionals, not including Reggie Drago VSTAR, if that would have been your answer, Christian?
Um, I'd say like Zard for sure. You know, just want to eat original. A lot of people are gonna play Zard because of that. So make sure your deck can have a favorable Zard matchup. The other one, I think Guardy. I think Guardy's also a good play. You know, it did pretty well in Toronto. I think two in ASIM in Toronto.
Yeah.
Very strong. I think that deck is also pretty underrated right now. I want to make sure I know how to play against Guardy. I know, like, just make sure I know the lines and make sure my deck can beat it. Yeah, off the top of my head, I'd have to say those two decks have had from Drago or the two I want to make sure I can beat.
And Cal?
I would probably say the same thing, Charizard. I think Charizard has a lot of faithful players that they just love playing Charizard and they don't switch. They play Charizard the entire format and they just feel the most comfortable, kind of like the EU, where they just feel the most comfortable with Charizard and they're just going to play Charizard because they know how to play Charizard and they've been playing it for so long where they're just going to bring it to every event. And then I also think that Charizard is just very good at beating the decks that are supposed to do good against Drago. So there will be like at some point, I feel like at events you have to say I'm going to have to get through Charizard or I'm going to have to get through Drago to do well at the tournament.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think for me, I'd probably say if I were going, I'd probably wouldn't take at least like not a terrible matchup to Lax. I think that even though it won't be super popular, I think that like it Lax is a deck that like is always well positioned enough that the deeper you get into the tournament, the more likely you are to play against them. So you want to have at least a chance of beating it. Like Cal was talking about earlier, I think that like Lax can definitely finish 3 games when it needs to, but a lot of time if you are playing like a deck that takes a longer time and you can just take 1 game against Lax and get a tie, that is like enough to at least get you your match point. So I would probably not play a deck that at least takes like a super bad matchup to Lax. What is the most underrated deck going into San Antonio, Cal?
Underrated. I think Pidgeot Control. Pidgeot Control or Snorlax, one of them, I think is the most underrated. I feel like they consistently do very well. Like if you see, I think Hassan got top 8 with it in Toronto as well. And then Sander ended up getting top 16 inside this last one as well. And I think that Jeremy also lost his Winidin to the other Reggie Drago player at Toronto with it as well. So Pidgeot Control, I feel like, is probably really underrated right now. A lot of people don't really consider it like as one of the top decks, or they don't really like think about it, and it's usually super low in the meta share as well. Because I think it's a very complicated and hard deck to just play as well. Because you kind of got to play around all your opponent's outs and know all your outs at the same time, which makes it just more of a harder deck to play. But I think Pidgeot Control is definitely underrated. Not a lot of people like think about it, and it definitely is like in a good spot in the current format.
And Christian?
I'm gonna say Lugia. I think Lugia is in a pretty decent spot. In Toronto, we saw Kieran in ASIM with Lugia. I looking at the bracket, I thought it was his tournament. I thought he was gonna go all the way. Unfortunate draws got him out. That's what Lugia does. In Birmingham, I know another Lugia lost in ASIM. I'm not sure how they did in Latin America, but I think Lugia, has a really good Drago matchup. Not a lot of Dragos are playing Sinnoh. Even with Sinnoh, like the matchup is still pretty close, like definitely winnable for Lugia. But as like me as a Drago player, when I'm sitting down and my opponent flips over Lugia VSTAR, like that's why I'm most scared. Like that's the one thing I don't want to hit. Uh, like I cut the Sinnoh. I know a lot of people cut the Sinnoh, so I think a lot of people can take advantage of that. Pull up with Lugia. You have a solid block class matchup on top of that. And like it's Lugia. Your matchups into the rest of the field are not bad. They're like decent, but yeah, you have a really solid Drago matchup. I don't like with the Lugia not having that much success in the last couple events. Gives Drago more of a reason to put the Sinnoh.
Yeah.
So Lugia can capitalize on that a bit. I can see a couple of Lugias in Top Cut in San Antonio. Someone told me that like there are 3 Lugias in Top Cut in San Antonio. I wouldn't argue with I wouldn't I'd believe that. It seems something that would happen. Yeah.
Yeah, Lugia definitely seems well poised to farm on the meta right now, especially like I'm not seeing like many Drago with Sinnoh at all. Although a lot of people will still probably play Cal's list. I think that Cal, did you play Temple at Toronto?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I thought so. I do think that most people are not playing Temple right now. I think Pidgeot Control is a good shout too. It definitely is one of the best decks in format. It'd be one of my top considerations along with Lax for San Antonio if I were going. But I'll pick a different underrated deck and say Cloth. I actually think Cloth, I mean, it was maybe overrated for a little bit there. Now I think it's underrated again. I think that honestly the deck is like deceptively difficult to play. I don't think that a lot of people give it the complexity that it deserves. I think even just like in their tech choices, maybe cut out some cards for consistency cards that they shouldn't, and should play things like Vacuum. I think add a lot of more layers to the deck. So I think that like the right player with the right list could still give Cloth the deep run that I believe it deserves. I think it is definitely underrated right now. Not a lot of top players giving it much respect at the moment. All right, which meta deck would you highly suggest against playing in San Antonio, and why? Christian?
Yeah, I'm gonna say the 2 decks we were talking about earlier, Palkia Knocked Out and Archaludon. A little bit hyped up. I still don't, despite the finishes this weekend, which are pretty solid, I still don't think those decks are that good, especially like compared to like all like the other decks in the format, like Charizard, Trago, Lugia, Gardevoir. Like, why wouldn't you play one of those? Like, why would you play Palkia Knocked Out or Archaludon if like Trago, Charizard, Guardy, like all these decks are in format? I don't know. I just don't think like you're gonna have a fun time if you play those decks in San Antonio. Yeah, that's what I think.
And Cal?
Yeah. For me, I would probably say Goldango. Goldango was the 3rd most played deck at Toronto, which was very surprising to me. And Goldango, I feel like is okay into a vacuum. Like it's just an okay deck. It's not like awful, but it's not amazing. It doesn't excel at like anything. It's like just solid. Like it's a very mid deck, and I feel like a lot of people really brought it to the tournament. And I feel like that is a deck I would probably not recommend right now to a lot of people.
Yeah, I agree. I think all three of those decks are terrible. I think that, especially one thing to keep in mind if someone's like looking at the results from Birmingham and wants to pick up Pokemon or wants to pick up maybe the Archaludon build that Liam played, is like, even if those decks were well positioned, you have to consider like you're probably not going to learn to play those decks to the level that those players did in a week. Um, so if unless you are already one of the best Pokemon players in the world, it's probably not worth taking the chance. Um, I'm actually gonna recommend against playing Gardevoir. I think that like personally, that is one of a few decks that I wouldn't recommend for the simple reason that I am of the opinion that right now, at least for North American events, you should only really be considering decks that are at least even into Drago. And I think that Guardy is close to even into Drago. I'm sure that some Guardy players would argue that it is even, but I think that you play against a top Drago player, like either the two players that we have here, and I'm sure both of you would consider yourself pretty happy to see your opponent flip over Oralts.
Yeah.
All right. Our last question today is, what is the best deck that you won't be playing in San Antonio, and why aren't you going to play it? I don't remember who we started with last time, so we'll just go Cal first.
The best deck that I wouldn't be playing to Toronto would be Charizard. I think Charizard's pretty good into the meta. It was actually my backup pick to play to Toronto, and I was on it for this about 2 weeks out. I was on it for Toronto until I kept losing to Reggie Drago. I think I lost like 8 games out of 10, and I said, "All right, I can't play this deck. I got to switch to Reggie Drago." But if I wasn't playing Reggie Drago, I think I would be playing Charizard in this format.
And Christian?
Um, I'd say Snorlax or Lugia. Yeah, I think Snorlax is really well positioned. And Lugia also think is really well positioned. But yeah, the reason I wouldn't be playing these is because Reggie Drago is a deck, and I think that deck is just too good not to play. That deck just feels pretty broken. Yeah.
And for me personally, if I was going to San Antonio, I would definitely be playing either Snorlax or Pidgeot Control. So the best deck that I wouldn't be playing is Reggie Drago. Part of the reason too for me is that like I haven't played it as much as or at a major event yet, especially when you're coming to like the last event of a format. It's one thing if you're like early format, you're picking up Drago, but late into a format, most of your opponents playing Drago, if you haven't been playing it to major events, have all played major events already with Drago, and you are going to likely have at least a slight disadvantage in Mirror. Like, I feel like if I played against either of you, from not having played Reggie Drago at the top tables before, I would be at least a slight disadvantage, maybe a little bit more likely to not catch some nuance of the Mirror match that I just haven't encountered yet. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me, both of you. I will give you guys a chance to do any, if you want to give any shoutouts. We'll start with Christian, and then Cal, if you have any shoutouts to make.
I'll shout out my sponsors, Dead Draw Gaming. Great team, great teammates. Yeah, just shout out Cutter Tap too. Great articles on there. Definitely check it out. And I want to shout out Endgame. They make great sleeves. They're a Canadian company. Um, use code LaBellster for 10% off if you're gonna buy sleeves. So thank you.
And Cal.
Yep. I would love to shout out FCBC. They do sleeves as well. Great company. Great sleeves. Great quality. All the mix. Tabletop Village. I would like to shout out as well. From Seattle, home team. Labyrinth TCG as well, and Gemtech as well. They do accessories and stuff like that, where they like sell bags and deck boxes and stuff like that.
All right, and I'll shout out the Shuffle Squad, and since you guys both gave your sleeve shoutouts, I better give an Ultimate Guard shoutout. Both of those sleeves terrible. Never use them. Use Ultimate Guard. But yeah, thank you so much both for joining me. Cal, I know you also coach on Metafy. And Christian, I don't think you coach.
No, not right now.
Maybe someday. Maybe someday.
Yeah, maybe.
All right. Well, I'll also leave. You guys want to check these guys out? Descriptions to both their socials or links to both the descriptions. You know what I'm saying. They'll be in the description below. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great night. Thank you guys for joining me.